Welcome to CNB. It's a brand new episode. We come to you this week from Algarve in South Portugal, and the car next to me, of course, is one you recognize really well. It is the I-Pace from Jaguar, a big bet for the brand and in many ways really representative of what's happening in the automobile industry right now. So, all the details of this all-electric. Jaguar says that it's doubled its portfolio and tripled its sales over the last 10 years, and the high growth period is really only now kicking in because you've got not one but 3 SUVs in the Pace family. Now, of course, the E-Pace and the F-Pace will continue to be the big growth drivers for the brand, but when it comes to the pinnacle of engineering and development for the company, well, that's got to be this car. The I-Pace builds on a new electric platform that uses Jaguar's 30-year aluminium expertise. Expect future electric Jaguars and Land Rovers to use a similar architecture. The layout is simple with a 90 kilowatt battery pack along a very flat floor pan. That's the first edition I'm driving right now. This is the color that gets you straight away because, of course, it's like a signature for this car. Photon red looks really nice. Now, in the face, it's a typical Jaguar, but you've got that scoop and you've got this really exaggerated muscle coming through the fender, running like a signature line all the way to the back. Now, this is where the difference in architecture kicks in from a design perspective, because even the designers say they had so much freedom to play with a very different from the ground up design. It's a long wheelbase, it gives you lots of space, it's a cab forward design as well, and there are certain elements, of course, that have been thrown in from a stylish perspective but also add to the aerodynamics. The flush door handles which retract, and then of course the way the rear is, not a typical coupe line, and yet it's a very, very specifically done thing for aerodynamics. Also gives the car a completely specific design element of its own. The standout design element for me is those big wheels that are almost exaggeratedly large, and they really help balance out the stubby design rather beautifully. The rear is the polarizing bit, as aerodynamics have meant a straight tailgate. The lights at the back are lovely though. Like the exterior, the I-Pace's cabin also uses a white sheet approach. While you do get the twin screen central console like the Velar, everything else is new. So yes, the inside looks different because of course the seats are placed so much further ahead than they are in usual cars. That's of course down to that architecture. It also gives you a lot more space because it's not just the roominess of the cabin that's increased, but you also get a whole lot of space here in the center because there is no transmission tunnel. So for instance, the little bin down here, over 10 liters of storage in there. Now, it is trying to be very modern in its whole look as well. So the panoramic roof and of course the 2 screens here help that cause. Now, you've seen this before in some of the other JLR vehicles, so I won't get into the details. It is all pretty cool. It's pretty intuitive as well, and it's handy when you're on the road. It's not difficult to use. You got the virtual cluster, and you know, it's the whole appeal of the car that's a little bit different, and it's a good thing in a way because you want the car to be a little bit of a standout, and the cabin certainly is. You've also got more room, like I said, physically that gets freed up. So 890 millimeters of rear legroom, for instance. It is different, it is cool, and it's really well finished. What I especially like are the seats. Very driver oriented and with excellent comfort and ergonomics. You do get a surprising amount of cabin space, and the car is also higher than you think. The boot is surprisingly spacious at 656 liters, and there's also 27 liters of storage in front, where the engine would be in a regular car. roads in this region are a good mix of smooth and rough, narrow and wide, making for an engaging drive.
Jaguar engineers specifically and very purposely picked synchronous permanent magnet motors, because what it does is it gives you a lighter weight system. And remember, there are two motors, one on the front and one on the back axle, and two transmissions, and the combined weight of that drivetrain, both front and back, is 78 kilograms each, which is much lighter than what you've seen in some of the other cars. Having two separate motors, one for the front axle and one for the rear, what that does is it doesn't simply give you all-wheel drive, it also gives you independent torque management at both ends. And so it isn't one system trying to send torque on demand to the different wheels. You have separate torque being managed for the front and the back, which of course helps from a traction perspective even when you're off-road.
The battery itself can get an 80% charge in 40 minutes, and every 15 minutes of charge gives it an additional 100 kilometers of range. Maximum range is 480 kilometers.
Now, all new feature from the infotainment system is the EV navigation. So what that means is you set yourself a destination and the system will quickly calculate to see if you have enough juice to get you there, and also try and find you the most efficient way to do that without running out of battery power, or it will suggest places on the way that you can charge up at. Now, what it will also do is make sure that it manages very efficiently the onboard systems. So whether it's the entertainment, the climate control, again, it will try and give you the optimum amount of battery usage. And besides that, it of course takes into account weather conditions, topography, and even your driving style. Now, speaking of running things efficiently, the system will also try and recognize how many people there are in the car and where they're sitting, and again try and give you optimal performance even of the climate control system. So heating or cooling, it'll only do that in the zones of the car where there are actually people seated. And for those people, lots of convenience. There's storage options everywhere, and you also got 6 different USB outlets and 3 charging points.
Jaguar says this car is the stiffest it's built and has a 50-50 weight distribution. There is no understeer and just a hint of roll, as the car will take you in and out of corners with amazing precision.
There's a lot of carryover from Jaguar's sports car program onto this one. Now, even the other SUVs, the whole idea was to make them more dynamic and sporty, but this one more directly so. And so you've got a complete carryover of the front suspension from the F-Type sports car, and the rear suspension comes from the F-Pace, but again, remember, that is a fairly sporty SUV to begin with. Now, optional air suspension as well, and this particular car has it. So it gives you 3 different ride heights. There's about 90 millimeters you can play with going up and down, and that helps, of course, when you're off-road or even with the wading capability. But it also has active dampers, and so that, of course, means real-time terrain response, whether you're on a nice flat tarmac or you want to get onto a dirt road, or do something a little bit more than that too.
Now, this is an SUV, and yet it's not born to stay off the road or anything. Yet you can do things with it you'd have never thought were possible. It has low grip and adaptive surface response modes that sense the terrain and provide ideal traction and braking inputs to climb, descend, and tackle some rough surfaces.
Now, being an SUV, you always knew that there was going to be some amount of off-roading credentials, but you know, I have to say this is a nice surprise. We've gone off the road and we are climbing up this dirt track, and something tells me it's going to get a little bit interesting, because that's what happens when it's a Jaguar drive. So here's hoping.
Torque is instant, and so the car doesn't lose grip, as I discovered when we went on a gravel and dust track, crossed a shallow stream bed, climbed some fairly steep mud slopes, and went through some deep ruts. And here's the kicker.
I knew the car's layout, the batteries, the motors, low floor, high ride height, all of that lends itself to great dynamics on the road. But that it would be good for off-roading? Well, that was a revelation. I also did use the S model on a gravel track, and even then the steel springs did just fine. So it's not like you need the adaptive air suspension as a must to go off the road. So it's a particularly windy afternoon, but I am still excited because, of course, it's time to get the I-Pace out on the track. And it's not just any track. The circuit here at Portimao is quite special because it's about 4.7 kilometers long, but it's not about the length. It's also not about the sharp corners, and there are quite a few. It's the elevation changes that I remember very fondly from this track, which should be a lot of fun on something which has so much torque on it.
The Autodromo do Algarve in Portimao is indeed special, and yes, I'm now switching to the Indus Silver for this bit in the S trim.
Now, it's not as if I haven't been out on a track in an SUV before. Sure, we've done that on a lot of performance SUVs, but the last time I was here at this circuit was with the M3 and the M4, so of course it's a very different experience today. But you know what, it's not the body style that's different, it's also the fact that this car is all electric, which makes it such a different animal. Okay, getting out now, and let's go.
Straight away, the sports car like agility and acceleration are indeed a huge surprise.
Now this car is a Jaguar, so there are lots of learnings from Jaguar sports cars that have obviously gone into it, because, you know, to be a Jaguar you also have to be fairly dynamic, and in literal terms you get a front suspension straight from the F-Type. But it's not just that, it's also the 50-50 weight distribution that gives it that sports car-like character. And while it comes alive on the road to quite an extent, it certainly comes to life here on a track.
The car is quick through corners, and yes, you can discount some of my enthusiasm that's built on sheer surprise.
Now the really flat and low floor pan of the car houses the batteries, which means that that's where some of the weight is as well. It keeps the center of gravity really low, which gives it that sports car character again, and again something you don't really expect coming into an SUV. Certainly not a car of this shape or size, or frankly an electric car, because the kind of character you're used to with electric cars in the past, you don't necessarily get that kind of performance.
It's no sports car, but it's not a sluggish and boring electric either. And it really challenges the erstwhile benchmark set by Tesla. And so yes, I do believe Jaguar has set a new benchmark in the electric car space.
Now the I-Pace has nearly 700 Nm of torque, and you know, with any electric car you go into it expecting, of course, a whole lot of that torque to kick in straight away, and you know, this one being an all-wheel drive, going to all the different wheels as well, depending on the kind of traction situation you are in. But it's not just about that. For me, the big surprise really with the I-Pace is how quickly you also get the juice in terms of power. So it's not just a torque story for me, it's also one of power. Lots of it. Now it's day 2 of the drive, and today it's the white in the S trim, the Yulong white if you please, and I'm driving the diesel today. Almost got you there, and that's what we're typically used to saying, right? Day 1 you drive a petrol, day 2 you drive a diesel, but that's the whole thing with this car. The appeal is just so different being an electric, and I have to tell you that having driven the car now on the track, on the road quite extensively, it is something to be said about 0 to 100 in 4.8 seconds. I've had an absolute blast driving the car.
On the second day of our drive, I drove the Yulong White S variant on the road, and by now I was driving the car intuitively and it was responding the same way too.
Like with all hybrids and EVs, this car has regenerative braking, which means of course that when you brake or you are in some sort of a dynamic position with the car going across a curve, all of that energy that gets stored up in the wheels transports itself back into the battery. So that part isn't new. What is new is that you actually have two settings for that braking on this car. So there's high and low regen, and what that means is you can use the single pedal driving, and when it's on high, all you have to do is lift your foot off the throttle and the regenerative braking itself will sort of take over and slow the car down, and once you get used to it, you pretty much don't need to use the brake at all, hence single pedal. And Jaguar says that with the way it's been developed on this car, 98% of all braking maneuvers or requirements can be taken care of without using the brake pedal at all.
The market response to the I-Pace will be something to watch for. It will be restricted by the lack of charging infrastructure, and so don't expect it to show up in India in any case very soon, though it will come at some point, says the company. But it is a great start and certainly does not feel like the first ever electric product from any manufacturer. And given how it drives, you can't help but compare it to other cars, not just other electric cars, and in that too, it comes out looking quite good.
So hybrids and EVs may not still be very relevant from an Indian context, but globally, that's pretty much where the industry is going. So I'm hoping that you're enjoying this new segment that we're bringing you since last week. Please react to it. Also tell me how soon you'd like to see these cars drive into our market. On that note, I'm going to say goodbye, and please promise me you'll wear your seatbelts. Join us next week.